Okay. Welcome back, John. Thank you for coming back to the channel. This is our episode for the series, episode 29.
Okay.
So a lot has been happening. News, I don't know where you want to take it.
Oh my God. I
Only
mean,
Pope issue and
yes,
Trump.
on top of everything else, yeah, we'll definitely talk about the Pope. Uh, the I I have been trying to explain to people the trying to give some feel with words in my newest Hogue Prophecy reports, which is going to be out next week. Um, it's a little late because I'm doing a second article for New Dawn magazine too. So this week, very honored to be with them again. And they have two articles in their, I think, March, April edition, uh, in that I have written for them. Um, the I've been trying to put in words, kind of expanding upon the theme of the art of the deal, which I have read and which I highly recommend anybody who wants to really get a feel for how shocking, surprising, awing, disgusting, for effect, that Trump sometimes does, um, is now moving into global politics in what he used to do as a real estate magnate. And I also have a quote from um, one of the Shark Tank people, business show, and I end the first article of three with her comments about how she's never met a person in New York business or business anywhere who's a better salesman than Donald J. Trump, and and so she told a story about how, still fresh in my mind, that anybody who lives in New York knows that on the west side there's a whole line of great Trump Tower buildings that are kind of there on the west side of the Hudson River. And that was all about the plaza. It all started with a deal where a bunch of very wealthy Hong Kong, Taiwanese, Chinese magnates, a whole family, very rich, wanted to talk to him at a time, probably was the earlier mid 90s, when he was still recovering from his real estate crisis that overtook a lot of real estate businesses in Manhattan Island, that was also saddled with him investing too much into Atlantic City casinos in New Jersey. And it was in that time in the early 1990s that was when I got kind of an oracular message that Trump was a man of destiny and I had to watch him carefully. And so I did. And I started, and I was like, I don't know why, but sometimes in medium work, you just follow where it takes you and just put your mind aside, don't think, and go there. And so since the early 1990s, it's kind of been watching him. And then when he started doing the Apprentice show, I watched it every episode, especially the boardroom scenes. And I'm saying, wow, this is odd. Me watching Trump doing all this stuff. It's kind of strange. But I said, no, no, stay with it, stay with it. And I stood with it, stayed with it for decades, slowly noticing that Trump was starting to indicate his interest in becoming president of the United States. I said, well, that's a pretty out there dream for a guy like that, but I'm just going to keep watching. And then I watched his Celebrity Apprentice shows, which were even better. And right when he was in the peak of all that, in 2015, and getting ready for another season, maybe a seventh or eighth season of that, which I'd watched them all. Um, he said to NBC, "Well, I don't think I'm going to be doing the show anymore because I'm going to run for president." Of course, he came down the escalator at Trump Tower, and I think it was on his birthday or near around 14th of June, came down with Melania and made his announcement that he was running. So after watching him make his announcement, so, oh, okay, he's finally doing it. And he was going to do it earlier, I found out, but he felt that his sons and daughter were not yet ready to run the Trump empire when in 2012, because he really was seriously thinking of doing it then. And so, but he felt by the time 2015 came around, they were definitely ready, and that proved to be true. Certainly, Eric, who really runs it, his tallest, well, not his tallest son, Barron, I think, is probably his tallest son now at just under or 7 feet or something. That he was ready to do his presidential dream. And so I took about 20 minutes looking at his chart. I pulled it down from Astrodienst or astro.com. Really, really good charts, very easy to read, great aspectarian tables. And which is something when I do private readings, I always ask people to give me their chart, either their birth chart or their progression chart with birth chart. And I um, find, and it's nice because astro.com makes it free. All you have to do is give them the instructions, and then it'll stay up for a day, and then if you don't get it out, it'll disappear and you'll have to do it again, but it's free. So, and then I found out I'm actually one of their celebrities. I have a page on astro.com with my chart. So for all those folks who used to say, you're nobody until you have a chart of, I guess I'm somebody now, although I consider myself more of a nobody than ever before because it works better that way, what I do. So anyway, I took 20 minutes after watching him talk about it, in 2015, June, I looked at his chart. And within 20 minutes, I realized I was staring at one of the most amazing full spectrum personality charts. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the transcendental all meeting at once. That I was finally, after decades since the early 90s, thinking, well, it's a good thing I prepared for this, because if he gets with this chart and the way it aspects the election day, if he manages to get through what were then 21 Republican nominees, if he manages to get through that, to all and pass through all the impossible hoops, do the primaries, do all that, and finally get there on election day, he could be an upset of Hillary Clinton, who I did predict would win the popular vote. So if he does upset her, it's because he would win the electoral vote, which he did in 2016. Now, this book, I was writing it in the summer into the autumn, and I officially published it, date tagged it on Amazon, Trump for President, Astrological Predictions. This book came out on the winter solstice of 2015, weeks before the primaries even began. And it has remained, point for point, the most accurate book of forecasts I've ever done, just looking at his chart. And now he's back. So I'm trying in these articles to kind of get my readers, and hopefully more of you will want to join my Hogue prophecy reports. We have the ways you can do it. Paul always has it on the page there, so you can check it out. The free stuff is always at hogueprophecy.com. And it has, and you link up and get the full spectrum of it. I was just writing about it, trying to convey. I'm editing it. I was trying to convey. I've been doing it for about 5-6 hours. How to hint, how to kind of break out of the rigidity of thoughts that people have, expectations, and try to see Donald Trump as the millipede in one of Aesop's fables. the millipede is walking down the lane, and a little baby bunny rabbit is watching him go by. And he says, "Gee whiz, Mr. Millipede, I've always wanted to ask you this question." "Well, what is it?" said the millipede. He said, "How do you manage to walk on 500 legs on one side of your long body and the other 500 legs on the other side of your body?" Well, the millipede kind of wondered and said, "You know what? I've never thought about how I do it. I just do it. Well, let's see if I can figure out how I do it." So he makes one step with 500 legs and falls on his side. And he's on his belly, he's on his back with 1,000 flailing little legs saying, "You naughty bunny, look what you've done to me." the the thing that Trump has this ability to improvise. He's in the moment because he's actually a great channel himself. He he goes in a situation, he does his homework, but when it gets to the moment of being in the moment, then he improvises. He'll do, usually what he does is he'll come in and or as this lady who was in the Shark Tank show said, who worked as his one of his brokers, worked with him for years. Um, he says, "I can't say it's a good virtue or a bad, it's kind of a more immoral, but it's just what he's able to do." And he's able to reach out without touching you physically, but touch your flaw, your weak point in a deal. He just knows how to go there. And I mean, you see that sometimes in like how he one by one took down all those 21 Republican wannabes in 2016 election. He just kind of, and I don't think he thinks about it. It's an intuitive kind of, he flows with it. He doesn't think, he's just available to what comes into his head when he feels it and he says it, like looking at Jeb Bush, who was on a paleo diet so that he would look good on camera, but he literally was starving and he couldn't quite put two and two thoughts together. And then here's Trump looking him up and down next to him, and he says, "You have no energy," like a child, That man has no energy. Or like he did to Rand Paul, he says, and here's all these people, two whole ranks, two companies of Republicans, and they stuck him in the center. And he said, "And why is Rand Paul here? I mean, he's only come in at 1%." Get all these one percenters out of here because there's just too many people in the field. And it's just this precocious 8-year-old that's inside of him that um, has it's precocious. It's not always polite. It can even be devastating, it can even be ugly. But what it does is offset the egos of others, expose the weak points. For instance, he's talking to these Chinese moguls, and she's watching him, and she's going, "My God, he's completely off theme. He's completely talking about stuff that they're not interested in. They're already here saying, 'We just want to buy the Plaza Hotel from you.'" And she's saying, and he's kind of totally off theme, talking about all this wonderful other stuff that's around the plaza. The great properties, kind of the dream of building a whole community around it that would use the plaza and all these skyscrapers along this very expensive strip of West Central Hudson side of Manhattan. And they're kind of going, "What?" And she's thinking like, he's lost it. He's lost it. He doesn't, he's going to lose his sale. And he needs this money to buy off of his debts. He's really risking everything with the way he's going. But as it turned out, he was able to convince them to buy not only the plaza, but build all those huge row of skyscrapers, Trump Towers, that are some of the major fixtures of Manhattan Island. And um, so I thought, okay, I've kind of set that up for people. And then I said, all right, let's cut to the juggler. Let's go to the most outrageous thing that happened in his first of 47 months to go that we just cleared a few days ago on the 20th of February. I mean, it's interesting. He has 47 months left of his 4 years and or so. And it's interesting, just as a coincidence, that he's the 47th president with 47 months. And and when he will be replaced, he's most likely going to be replaced by J.D. Vance, who also caused quite a shakeup around the world with his remarkable speech that I was very surprised. And I'm also writing my third and final article about that speech that he said to the Munich Security Group, all the leaders of Europe and NATO. He just sat there, he just said, um, I know we can talk about security issues and all of that, but I think we need to talk about what we're making a security system for. And then he went in and just politely but firmly threw truth bombs at the way the so-called democracies of Europe that are in the EU and the NATO and involved in the security thing are, and he cited examples. And he also cited the same problem, listed the same problem happening in the United States, where democracies these days are taking people's freedom of speech away, suppressing them. And he cited three good things that everybody knew about. And I have the entire transcription of what he said, as well as the link, so you can actually watch it. And I highly recommend you watch how he delivers a speech, because I think this speech that he uh, delivered was one of the most important historic speeches of any time in American history. I mean, it's right up there with the Gettysburg Address. It's right up there with Lincoln's second inauguration. It had that quality coming out of this young man, who very likely will be the next president of the United States. And then when he's the next president in, I guess, January 2029, he begins, he will have 48 months as president in his first term. So 48th president, 48 months. Anyway, so Trump then went on to do this presser with, I think it was in the middle of his first month, so it was about a couple weeks ago, with Netanyahu on a podium to his right, um, not looking completely well. He had his prostate removed and he's got level 3 cancer, so I don't know how his health is going. But when Trump suddenly shocked him right off his center, and he kind of held it as best he could. He didn't know. The only thing I noticed is he was holding on to the podium so tight that his knuckles were going white. And he's trying to maintain, but he kind of looked at Trump when Trump is kind of reading some notes, and his energy's low, just like she was saying. He was not kind of into it. He was just off somewhere else, and he was reading these notes. His energy was low, and he suddenly says something that nobody, all the Zionists that thought they had him in his pocket, in their pocket with all the money, Adelson's money and stuff, they're all listening to him. Netanyahu's listening to him, and he's saying, I'm going to own this Gaza problem. The United States is going to own this and fix this problem. So, I mean, on the one hand, Netanyahu's looking like, well, should I be happy that he's taking this mess on himself? But on the other hand, he's kind of looking, because he's no dummy as a political animal. He's saying, did he just take all my power away and own my thing and fix it for me, which means I'm nothing anymore as a politician? Has he just made all the Zionists kind of go, well, that's great. He's going to take it on, but if he's going to rebuild it, then is it going to end up being what we want to do? Cast out the Palestinians and turn it into our beachfront property. So, so he and what he did was like stumbling through in this improvisation of he never mentioned the Palestinians or the genocide. He never even mentioned them as people. He just said, well, the people that have been there, they've had a hard time, and it's just an unlucky place for them, which is true. That's true, but it's like um, not acknowledging at all that it's their land and they're ready, and everybody around the world is involved with this whole problem. They're looking at him going, oh, he's not going to move those 1.8 million Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip over their 1.8 million dead bodies. Will he do that? And then what happened was he did mention that Egypt used to run the Gaza Strip, and that is telling, because there's this thing where he'll say a whole lot of stuff which is not factual, but then I was personally shocked by the fact that he openly said afterwards, after the opening statements in the press conference, he did these long periods where he talked about how, well, we're going to move them out. We'll find the place to move them here and there. We'll give them good homes. And there's about 1.8 million people that we have to move. Now, what shocked me was, out of the blue, this was a fact, not a positive hyperbolic way, as he calls his first bid, his first deal idea is always positive hyperbole, even if it's positively ugly and setting people off. He suddenly is saying the correct number, unfortunately, of how many people are probably have survived since October 7th, 2023. This Palestinian genocide began. He didn't mention 2.3 million people. That's in fact, they always round it off to the lower number. It's actually closer to 2.4, but we'll just say, okay, 2.3. Back in September, in my Hogue prophecy report, I cite this and quote from it a bit, that there was a uh, Judging Freedom with Andrew Napolitano is one of my sources. He's in New York. He had Ralph Nader and some other people on, and they were looking at reports that were starting to come up, first with the Lancet, and others were saying, look, for months and months, people were saying 48,000 Palestinians had died. But clearly, the only reason why that number stood still is that the systematic destruction of all government buildings, churches, schools, universities, and the hospitals, where people were, until the hospitals were destroyed and the hospital staffs were killed and buried, were all the people that were alive to keep a count of the bodies and the dead and the wounded were all bodies dead and wounded. And so the numbers only stayed around 48,000 for over a year. But what Lancet did is said, look, you have an area the size of London that's been bombed by 2,000-pound bombs into complete rubble, like Stalingrad, and it's possible. And then you have all health sustainability systems, water systems, food is being denied. The trucks are being held for 20 days so that when they're finally released after it's secure, the food inside is rotting. And so there's a systematic starvation campaign going on that that has to be taken into account. When I saw all the Palestinians moving when the ceasefire was happening, they're all moving back to the northern Gaza area. I took note how there were a lot less elderly people, a lot less babies, that everybody was a little thinner. And, signs that you look at that show that the systematic starvation is going on and still going on, even with the ceasefire. And so taking all these factors in from other studies, what the Lancet was saying is that the rather than 48,000, when their report came out in early 2024, they were thinking, well, the real number is probably somewhere conservatively around 186,000 people have died already. But it's very likely to be too low an estimate because, you're dealing with the densest populated area in the world, which has an urban sprawl that's the size of London in one long strip, the London metropolitan area that has been absolutely devastated by US bombs and missiles fired by US jets piloted by IDF, Israeli forces, with a clear intention of taking out as many civilians as they take out a few non-civilians. And so the I started to estimate and write that, what at the time that around midsummer, August into September, that when Napolitano was having his show, the estimate was at 300,000 is actually the number. And then I realized from just my senses, it was more intuitive. But I said, I imagine, and I predicted that it will actually be another 300,000 by the new year, which is now. So Trump says 1.8 million. I estimated that it would be 1.7 if you count for 600,000 of the 2.3 million Palestinians dying. So he had the number as close as any, give or take 100,000. That's the number. And I was saying, who gave him that number? Was it CIA? Was it intelligence? Was it the Israelis? But it really felt like he had given a real number. So I said, I have to remove these people. And none of the not too smart press people out there were even there to say, hey, there's 2.3 million. Where'd you get the number 1.8? That means there's 500, half a million or so people missing. What are you saying? Are you saying that you have intelligence that says that that's how many people have really died? No, nobody asked that question in the press. They were too gobsmacked. They were too like about Trump. A lot of people's first impression was Trump has just destroyed all of his revolution in one press conference by talking openly about that which should never be talked about, like innocently almost said, oh, we just have to move these people out, which is another way of saying mass genocide is not just killing people, but taking them out of a region, so the Arab world went crazy. The king of Jordan came to have a talk with Trump. The president and dictator of Egypt did not attend, but I mean, I watched the poor king of Jordan. It looked like he was having a stroke. He was sitting there, and I've never seen a man blink so violently, moving his face into a blink. It looked like every time he blinked, he looked like his face had become a single wrinkle. And it's like his whole face went meh, meh. And the poor guy, and of course he was very diplomatic, but he kind of was saying, no, nobody's going to move anybody. And of course, that wasn't the point. The goal wasn't to move anything or anybody because it can't. It's just like it wasn't the point to just sell them the Plaza Hotel. He was trying to sell them on something that was bigger, that would make them even more profit. And so, but it wasn't a thought, it was an instinctive reaction. And I think a lot of what Trump does comes from that place. and he improvises. He doesn't know where it's going because Trump's sun is conjoined a very powerful Uranus with his sun, and his sun happens to be the wonderful polarity or opposites attracting twins of Gemini. And so he's got the Gemini twins either coming together or going off, uh, saddled with the ruler of Aquarius, the Aquarian age, which is the ruler of chaos, creating order. So I gave a term to this thing that happened as one of the most extreme versions of Trump's chaos diplomacy. He throws chaos. He he lets chaos go. Like the millipede can walk on 1,000 legs, and but if he thinks about it, he'll be falling over. Uh, you just do it. It's just like the great line of Yoda to Luke, and where Luke, so he wants him to levitate the X fighter, and Luke says, um, "I'll try," and then Yoda says, "Try not, do or do not. There is no try." And so, it's like, yeah, that's very Zen. Zen doesn't think, Zen does from nowhere, from now here. And so there's something Zen and chaotic about Trump. I mean, it's like who it's like I've said the story before. It's like Joe Shu is talking to some head case about who wants to ask him a real intellectual answer for his intellectual thinking about enlightenment, which is something impossible because thinking can't ever know what enlightenment is. Thinking is only witnessed by the enlightenment. And then Joshu's response was to get up from his mat, grab the guy, and run himself and the guy out the second floor window. You know, his answer was to grab the guy, molest the guy, take him going through the window and following after him, hitting the ground. From face value, it looks like assault. It looks like attempted manslaughter. But the act, as shocking as it was, made that intellectual drop his mind. It scared him so. The surprise was so complete that the impact probably broke a few bones. He's laying there with this Zen master on top of his chest, who used him as the pillow that blocked his fall. He looks at him and says, "Get it?" And of course, the guy was like, and the man became enlightened. I mean, what is it really all about? Whether you're a nice person or do everything proper, or maybe sometimes it has to be something wild and unexpected that throws you into an awareness that no mind can tamper with ever again. It can use it, but it's not just lost in your head. Your head becomes a servant. With one Zen stick over your head, the shock brings you into the present. So, it I won't call it immoral or amoral. I call it transmoral. It's where it's a morality that transcends what you've been programmed to make as your boundaries. And I don't know how Trump, maybe he has gone on that path in other lives, but he definitely there's something very zen about what he does, very centered in his precocious 8-year-old, which he even has acknowledged on 60 Minutes. It just came out of him spontaneously. He says, I I've never changed since I was 8 years old. I'm still that same 8-year-old. And of course, the big problem with that is, and it's something else I'm going to be in the next 4 years talking a lot about and trying to find new layers into it for everybody, is that, I mean, to give you an example, I'm walking from the parking lot of my little village's grocery store, where it's the center of Langley, Washington. And so that's where you meet a lot of your neighbors. And one of the neighbors, who's a merchant, and they all know it's a small town with 1,000 people, so they all know what I do. And so especially around presidential times, elections. They say, well, what do you think is going to happen? So I had her come up, and she had a moment of Trump derangement syndrome where she suddenly was all nice, and then suddenly she exploded out saying, please tell me that lightning will strike Trump and he'll just disappear. He'll just blow up in flames. And I said, well, and I say it without any charge for and against, because that's how I manage. My way to say don't think and do is to not be identified with either side. And then I can really watch people as they are and as they go, warts and all, virtues and all, and evils and all. And I said, no, he's going to remain now. And I talked to her a bit about how, have you ever noticed that Teflon Don has this quality that no matter what he does, he seems to always get out of it. So he's very lucky. I mean, and notice that whenever people, that negativity just doesn't work. That if you get all upset and angry and enraged, you just go crazy and goes on. It's like without doing anything, he mirrors your negativity right back into your heart, and you've got to deal with it. And I often I've had to play therapist because I live in a very blue end of my island, Whidbey Island, up here in the Pacific Northwest. And I had to do it in 2016, and especially, and I just said it just came out of me spontaneously, like my moment of my millipedal moment, where I just said, the only thing that works with Trump is to love him, not to hate him. If you hate him, you destroy yourself. I don't know why. I haven't yet figured out how this works, but he has a kind of energy that if you throw negativity at him, you will be harmed because your negativity will be poisoning you. And that's why Trump derangement syndrome is a real psychological disorder. And show me somebody that hasn't been made uglier and more unhappy and more sick. That is holding on to all this hatred for this man. I haven't seen anybody going, "Oh, I just feel so great because I just hate this guy's guts." You know, it's not there. So anyway, that's so the so what happened is, to finish this off, what happened is he just threw all this out there. It looked like he had set himself up to be in a quagmire in Gaza Strip. It felt like he had set himself up to, if people just said, okay, go ahead, Donald, into doing what the MAGA movement never intended when their vote for him to do, like get in another forever war mess, not just a war, but a genocide. And that'll be burdening the American people. He'll get locked in here. All money will go into this quagmire, and we got another Vietnam, another Afghanistan, because that could be implied from him saying, I'm owning it, and the United States is going to own this problem. Uh, and because nobody was expecting him to say that. But then, but what happened? And I don't think it was even planned. It was more like, I'm just going to go out there with this, and then we'll see what happens next. Just like what happens in his business dealings. He throws everybody off their center. And what it does, not always, but what it does is make the other people wake up and make a real bid, a real offer. And it happened in this case because he went there innocently into that place of genocide and stuff, and not naming people, and even reading Jared Kushner's notes, because he infamously was the guy last year who was saying, well, there could be a really great business opportunity here, as this guy had just finished saying, with all this chaos and all these people getting killed and the place destroyed. And he says, well, I know, but we could have this nice business opportunity. So he was playing a variation on that, but being president was so shocking. What happened is none other than al-Sisi, the Egyptian president, suddenly said, look, I've got another deal, a better deal that we can do. And he did something that Trump, whether he had designed it or not, I have not seen him break this deadlock that has been there ever since 1948, where when the Israelis started to take the land from the Palestinians, when they started to come into Palestine, I've never seen uh, the Arab world wrings its hands and says, oh, we've got to do something, but they don't do anything. It's just like you get a gesture for the Palestinians, but they don't care about them. And, but this time, this was so horrifying what Trump was thinking that the Egyptian president kind of said, since this was part of Egyptian land before 1967 war, we're going to own it. I've got the UAE and I got the money from Saudi Arabia and stuff. And what we're going to do is, because they don't want the Palestinians to come into Egypt, we will make a camp for them. They will stay there all the years it's going to take to clear the place out, and they can still be there on their land with the new buildings built. So who knows if this is going to get through to fruition, but what just happened was all this fighting, all this killing of Palestinians that Netanyahu and the Zionist regime that he's running has done has led to him losing ownership of the Gaza Strip now, because Trump's going, okay, that's a good idea. Let's do that. So he owned it, and now the Arabs are owning it, and now the Arab money is going to build it. And my intuition is that he'll probably throw a concession bone to all the Jewish, all the realtors who want to build some great thing out of it. They'll get a bit of North Gaza to be able to build that little extra part. And I think that's what's going to happen. So uh, this quality of Trump is going to make the next 4 years very interesting, shocking, but illuminating, potentially alchemically illuminating, if you can just put your opinions, don't suppress your opinions, but just kind of be beyond your opinions and see the thing from a bigger picture.
We do have a question, but
I
before
imagine.
I go with the question that was typed in the chat, I just want to remind the audience we are live streaming on YouTube, and I have been able to get the Rumble live stream working, but we did miss the first 20 minutes of it because I was testing it out. So we have the live call-in on X Spaces for the ones that are watching. If you would like to be live and ask your question to John, a great opportunity through X Spaces. So just go to my X channel, and it's the only X Spaces that's going on at this moment. So just ask for the mic, and we'll pass the mic to you. But also, we have in the links in the description box of both videos that are live streaming at the moment, the link to John's website so you can sign up for his periodical and to do a reading, to sign up for a reading. We'll talk about that later in the broadcast, but please click the link, take a look at his website, and sign up for his periodical. Now, Amber asked a question, John, so I'll read it off to you.
Okay.
John, can you explain what your theory is on why a blessing is a curse and a curse is a blessing, and why this is dangerous?
Well, Amber, in the world of mind and time, there are always two sides to the coin, if you will. A blessing can be a curse can be a blessing. Take in point, what happened when the curse of, as I predict, it will eventually be known by all sides that the 2020 election was a fraud, that there was about 20 million votes that were fake. And you want to hear more about the details of that, I can certainly send you, if you become a member, I talk about things like this. Um, but I'm seeing now that if Trump had been allowed his second electoral college vote, because I predicted that Biden would win the majority of the popular vote, but that Trump would probably pull again another electoral vote. We won't know if that's true unless they do with it what they did in 2000 when I made a similar controversial prediction and held to it, stuck to my guns, when I said if they allowed the recount, Al Gore would have won, not George W. Bush, by 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 the recount. A year later, a bunch of political scientists and people did go to Tallahassee into the warehouse, and they did count the votes three ways. And he won all three ways that you could count them. And his biggest lead was Al Gore was 75 votes. So that told me in an objective way, I've had the first objective proof that my intuition about it, things that if they're counted will probably come out true if people count it. So I'm always hoping that someday somebody will count all those fraudulent votes out of the system, and it'll be about 20 million of them in the 2020 election. But now, so that was a curse. That was a curse. We had, again, another illegitimate president, just like George W. Bush was. And of course, George W. Bush led to the Iran-Iraq war, really made the first swing of a wrecking ball that is eventually, over the next 20, 30 years, was the beginning of the end of the American hegemonic era since Cold War One. And now even that has a hidden blessing in the curse. It ended this. Now, the but the blessing in this was if Trump had won, I don't I think it would just been a repeat of his first term. It was at a time when there was all this repression of free speech. It would have been overshadowed a lot more by the COVID shutdown and lockdown, which was really an exercise in seeing how much the deep state could get away with it. How much of a sheeple people are the mob of Americans? Will they not rise up and get angry and say, "Don't you ever do that again"? No, they couldn't. They couldn't do it until 4 years later. The window for that was 4 years later. Trump would have had another non-starter 4 years. And so this curse, this terrible thing that was done, a fraudulent election that stole his election, gave him 4 years to mature and ponder and study the Constitution, seeing how if he got back in, that the Supreme Court was one of the things that they feel very critical about of our current period of time is that the deep state, a bunch of people who are career bureaucrats who are never elected by the people, have more and more took over our government and took over how the bills that the electors vote for are written by them to their views. And so the Supreme Court has made it pretty clear. The majority of the Supreme Court has made it very clear, and also some of the non-Republican picked people are interested in it as well. That there's uh, you can't have a democracy if the republic is not run by the people, of the people, for the people, and their vote. If it is a career clique of deep state bureaucrats that And what will happen is that you can have a new person or a new government come in, and people are getting frustrated. They needed another 4 years to get frustrated about this. Another 4 years, and finally the window opened because, as I warned, don't curse the country again with a demented candidate. But it happened anyway. But that curse also became a blessing because it was so obviously wrong that people in the next presidential cycle, 2020 through 2024, started to wake up to this and saying, enough. A lot of people who couldn't stand Trump and still don't like him as a person definitely wanted to vote for him instead of getting Miss Cackle, who replaced a person completely unqualified to be president, um, be kind of pushed to the top to be a perfect medium for the deep state. I mean, Scott Ritter, one of my best sources, has said more than once, and I feel the same as a forecaster. I felt it that if Kamala Harris had been elected in another fraudulent election, World War III would happen because the deep state would start pushing harder on Russia, and Russia would not be listened to. Russia would then have to do something extreme, and these idiots would continue to escalate, and we would all probably die in July of this year in a thermonuclear war. That was avoided because enough Americans finally were waking up to this whole scene that's been going on for the last 4 to 8 years. All the suppression of Trump's by the deep state, followed by 4 years of Biden and Kamala Harris and all of that, and censorship and virtue signaling and people being woke rather than being awake. You know, when you say, I woke, I'm woke now, that's a person who doesn't understand that awakening is never something in the past, never something of the future. Awakening is here, it is now, and it is eternally awake. This is the whole mystical quality of this. And anybody that says, I'm woke, it's, it's so sad and pathetic because if you're woke, you're living in the past, projecting your past as your future, and you're missing the very ordinary, luminous, beautiful being that you are, that only exists in everyone if they live here and now in the eternity of the present. Awake, not woke. So all these things hatched out in a strange way, just for the happenstance of unconscious living. If Trump had had his second term, that it would have been a non-starter. But now he's actually having his second term now. And a lot of people make the mistake where they say, well, it's like he's only going to be there for 4 years. I mean, Scott Ritter had a lot of great things to say about this the other day. And he was like, yeah, well, yeah, it's another 4 years, but it's not his first term. Most presidents who are two-term get very little done in their first term. They get most of their agenda done in their second term. That his has come 4 years late is actually good. And we've already seen in 1 month, whether you agree with it or not, in this last month, this first month of 47, Donald Trump has set in motion more things than Biden did, more things than he did in the last 8 years. And it's just 1 month. It's going to multiply these changes that have just happened by 47, a magnitude of 47 and times. And we are in a period of history of transformation. It'll be a full spectrum. It'll be great things. It'll be ugly things. It'll be cursed things that may turn around with time and action into being blessings. So to Amber, I just want to say that one of the things I've learned as a witness of consciousness, as a meditator, not meditating on something, but witnessing the mind, the world, and living in the world, totally engaged with it, but not of it, not being aware. No mindful am I of the traps of the mind, and I just take note and come back to the eternity of the present. So when you start doing that, you start learning that there's an art to life. That every blow is a moment to be slapped into more clarity. Your enemies tend to mature you far deeper than your friends. That if you that every blessing hides a curse in it, and every curse hides a blessing. Things are not just this way or that. The this and that is watched by something else. If you look at at curses and blessings as two sides of the same coin, the two sides never see each other. But metaphorically speaking, when you become a witness of it, when your consciousness and love starts to awaken, you are as if the invisible hand and the invisible third eye that is holding that thing before it and seeing both sides at once. And in the seeing, you are a seer, and the coin is let go.
We have another question if you want. Okay, Peter asked the question, hey John, what what do you think about the prophecy of the Pope given the health of the current Pope?
Good question, because it's affecting me immensely because one of my best-selling books, which I wrote in 1998, was about the papal prophecies of Saint Malachi, the Irish saint, who is purported to, in 1138, in one night on the Janiculum Hill in Rome, after he did his long pilgrimage with his disciples from Ireland to Rome. He had that the story goes that he fell into a trance and and then his scribe started writing down, he would say a Latin motto, and he ended up saying 111 of them all by dawn, with one coda about the final pope, or so people think, that had a small paragraph describing him, the last pope. So I wrote, I was surprised to find out that no one had really written a full accounting of this, full-bodied accounting of this fascinating, famous prophecy of these 112 mottos until I did it for Element Books, and it was published in 1998. It's actually, if I look back over here, um, it's the book that's between the big one, whoops, the big one right here, this book right here, between that one, my first book of 52, and then this one there, the little golden center, that's the book. And it was published in 6 languages, and for several weeks in 1998, after I was on The View, uh, when the girls were nicer then. And some of them, like Behar, was there actually, and we had a kind of nice. She thought she would get me with jokes, but I'm basically a suppressed comic. So, and she was like, "Whoa, this guy speaks comic," and so um, I was number one in all books in Amazon for a couple weeks. Now, that was before there were ebooks, but still, there were millions and millions of copies being bought and sold. And so for a week or more, I was the number one book of all books for that book. I did that again after 911 when my 1997 book, which is that big black one I was showing right there, 1,000-page book, Good Morning America was kind of making a report about it for 15 minutes about how everybody has canceled their book tours for this season in the autumn in New York publishers and stuff because of 911 and towers going down. But there's this book that's not even published, and it's 1,000 pages, that was published in 1997 called Nostradamus, The Complete Prophecies by John Hogue, that suddenly this number one bestseller. It also went for weeks on Amazon as the only book they were selling. So as number one. Um, so so yeah, so here I am thinking I I once talked to 54 million Russians on Channel One, their 60-minute show. It was filmed here, but it was broadcast there. In 2013, when the Pope by Benedict XVI became broke for 600-year tradition of popes not retiring but leaving the Vatican in their red slippers first, into the tombs and stuff, so that you died. And of course that made obvious sense when people are usually elderly when they became popes in times full of diseases without back antibiotics, which is still a relatively new development. We haven't, we only started having antibiotics between the 30s and advances that happened from medics and sulfa and stuff from World War II. So we're not actually a century into having antiseptics and antibiotics. Um, so as Bradbury used to talk about at one time in his lectures, he was talking about how, in fact, he had some of his siblings dying, before they were very mature, and it was just a given that if you had a family, you would lose people to infections and things like that. And then when the antiseptics and antibiotics started coming, and then suddenly this is an explosion of people that were not dying. So he said, now here again from Amber's question, the mixed bag of a situation. In a way, people that lived around death more than we do, in our antiseptically protected bodies, um, they lived more totally in a certain way, because when you said goodbye to somebody, you might not see them again. In a way, so many of the first death experiences of people in the era of antibiotics is when you lose a pet, because they, of course, by nature, don't live that as long as you, but you lose a sister, a brother, your mother, your father. Death was much closer to people up to that time. So in a way, it's a blessing that we have antibiotics and people are not dying like that. But we're also challenged with a new challenge of living without that intimate other member of the relationship, death, being equally intimate. Now, awareness, meditation, you can feel it. You can feel how life and death are hand to hand. And then what happens is you start to see that if you live your life fully, death becomes the climax of life. Uh, and that so it doesn't matter whether you live in an antibiotically cleaner world or a world full of germs. You can still discover this and also enjoy the gift, rather than have it be a curse that keeps death at bay. But now back to this, it's kind of it's kind of indelicate of what my first reaction was when I haven't, that book came out in 1998 and I haven't updated it since then. So, that was when John Paul II was still the Pope, and I didn't have to talk about Benedict. I didn't have to talk about Francis. So I had been for several years now, since Francis has been getting older, I've been preparing uh, all the things that I can update now of the book, and then put into it an expansion for the John Paul chapter, a complete new chapter for Benedict the 16th, and then a chapter on Francis, and followed with an expanded version of the final chapter, which um, is a part of Catholic prophecy that I find very interesting. Joaquin di Fiore, a Calabrian monk in South Italy, he was, I think, almost a near contemporary of Malachi. He wrote his own mystical understanding of the good news of God's message to the world as being three 2,000-year time periods that are named after the Holy Trinity. The first 20 centuries, so it's an evolution, like the Old Testament, New Testament, but there's a third state, which is also parallel in other religions. And in the update, I will go deeper into that, as Paul and I have talked about it, about the third temple and what it really means in this third state. And a lot of Kabbalists who I'm associated with through one beautiful rabbi friend of mine is they also understand this. So it is the era of the Father. I am the jealous God. I'm kind of having a up and down relationship. I'm even kind of in a physical form sometimes talking to the things I've created. So it starts with the era of the Father, 2,000 years, which was then overtaken in 33 AD by the era of the Son, which is about forgiveness and love thy neighbor, and a lot of very Buddhistic ideas, because Jesus in his lost years, there's records of the man who was called Asa. He was also called Asa by the Talmudic people, and he was called Asa. He was recorded in Tibetan monasteries as studying there. And the Golden Rule is actually in the Dhammapada, predating Jesus by 1,500 years. Do unto others as you have them do unto you is one of Buddha's famous statements, and he obviously took a lot of that back with him to Judea. There's also a story that he got away after crucifixion, had not died, and ended up living in Kashmir, where it's purported the lost tribe of Israel ended up in the beautiful paradisical mountain valleys of Kashmir, India. Now, I think we should try to prove that by genetic testing to see if there's a lot of Semitic heritage in the people of Kashmir. They certainly have a look of being having heritage of the Semitic races. But no one's done it yet, so we could prove or disprove this theory. But the story is that Jesus became a shepherd again, and he had a gathering that he used to sit in silent prayer with. He never spoke again or preached. He just used his, because what happened to him, I think, is that when he was up on the cross, even he was caught up in the expectation that maybe God would take him hovering off the cross and bring him into armor, and he would land on the ground as Emmanuel, and cast out the Romans, because here he was, his famous statement, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, or whatever. I can't say it right, but in Aramaic, but Lord, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? So even he at the end also expected what Judas also, because he was his most educated disciple, was expecting, that he was going to launch the Holy War and liberate the Hebrews from the Romans and so on. It didn't happen. So he passed out. Longinus, the Roman, stuck him with the spear, and he bled, which meant he wasn't dead. And Joseph Arimathea had his probably Pontius Pilate and Joseph of Arimathea, because Pontius Pilate, when he said to Jesus, "What is truth?" and Jesus didn't answer, he realized, well, that's the answer. The answer is don't say anything, be it. And Pilate, who was a Neoplatonist, he immediately realized that this man was a mystic, and he wasn't a pagan, but he was like this man. So they had this whole idea of doing the vote, having him crucified on before the Sabbath so that he would only be up there for 9 hours, not 3 days. And then he'd take him out, put him into Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, that was prepared for Joseph of Arimathea, and then he was healed and took care of, and then he was wandering around. People were seeing him, thinking he'd risen from the grave, but he was heading east, folks. He was trying to get out of Dodge, and he ended up in Kashmir, and he lived to be 112. Just sit every day after sheep herding, sitting down with his disciples, and they're all in silence. And his body, he was trying to seek the grave of Moses, and he found it, and it's still there. Purportedly, the grave of Jesus and the grave of Moses are in the village of Pahalgam, which is the name, means the village of the shepherd, he being the shepherd. So he built a village where his disciples lived around the grave of Moses, and then he ended up with the grave. And there's a Jewish family that has its lineage all the way back 2,000 years. That and Hebrew is jotted on the temple there and the graves that have been taking care of both of them since Moses died. And so it's a very old lineage. That's the story. Um, I'd love to verify it, but so the so all this so what happens after the Epic of the Sun is about to take place in 2033. Everybody was all fixated on the millennium. But if the age of the Holy Spirit, Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, this we are about by the year 2033, which will be exactly 2,000 years when Jesus' ministry ended up in his crucifixion and him leaving for the East. And 2033 is the real millennium for Christianity. It is the real, it's the beginning of the age of the Holy Spirit. And long story short, a lot of the same traditions have in them the idea, for example, that one thing I learned from Kabbalists is they say, you don't need to build a gross temple of stones and things like that, because in this new era, you're inside your heart is the holy temple. It is built in everyone's heart. And similarly to Joachim de Fiore's description of the third age of the Holy Spirit that's when you don't need the Church of Rome. That's when there's no need to have a go-between. That is when God's message from its fatherly period to its loving Son, to its most intimate and direct encounter with us there's a direct connection to the divine, to us. No longer are there steps and go between. It is just there. And that's what's going to be with us for the next 20 centuries. So I end the last Pope, the first edition, also talked about this. And this will be expanded in the new version. I'm kind of thinking I would be working on it sooner than I planned because I've been watching the Pope for a while. And I it looked like he was recovering, but then on Saturday, he had a really bad asthmatic affair where he couldn't breathe, and they had to put him on the air, oxygen. And it was so, I don't know. I was looking at him. He's looking like he's ready to go. Um, but it's also possible that if he, because what he said before is still what he feels. He says, if I can't do the job, I don't understand why I should burden the church and the people by not being capable of interacting as a shepherd, the shepherd, the vicar of Rome. And so he agreed with Benedict that it was a good thing to break the tradition. And it made more interesting that Benedict was a very conservative pope, and he is probably the most liberal pope that has ever been in the Vatican or the Bishop of Rome. And so it's interesting that in two successions, you've seen the most conservative and the most liberal of popes may very well have made the new tradition retiring. Now, that is very important in this lineage about the popes that purportedly St. Malachi may have started. And I go into the history of that and how certain dead ends have happened. He may have done all these prophecies, but I've, since 1998, kind of turned the whole theories of his work upside down with a simple test. I looked, there are 5 ways these short Latin medieval mottos can describe either the main theme of a pope's life, their Christian name, or maybe their chief enemy, like Aquila Rampax, rapacious eagle. That coordinated with the reign of Pius VII. And Pius VII, if you know his history, was under house arrest of Napoleon Bonaparte for many years. From 1808 to 1814, he was a guest and prisoner at Fontainebleau outside of Paris, France, in the Chateau Fontainebleau. And he so the rapacious eagle, how does that equate to Napoleon? Well, his conquering armies had upon the cavalry standards, the infantry and artillery standards, a brass eagle, Romanesque eagle in the tricolore, or with all the gold leaf, gold lace descriptions of battles that were won in the white part of the tricolore, the tricolor. And and so it fits. So that's one that fits. Now it could be if the guy was named Little Peter or something like that, Piccolomini or Little Man, and then that's in the heraldry. A lot of it is the heraldry. Like Flower Among Flowers is for Paul VI, and most recently in the 60s. Flower Among Flowers. Well, his coat of arms was a fleur-de-lis, 3 French flowers. The more interesting is what John Paul II's was. It was De Laboris Solis, the labor of the sun. Now, I think like a medieval person, it was often considered in a total eclipse that the sun was disappearing to be born again in the sun's labor. So people started to look and say, okay, he had the labor, was he born on an eclipse? Yes, he was born on a total eclipse, 1920. And when his Carmelengo, which would later become Cardinal Ratzinger, becoming Benedict the 16th, who was the man who ruled Rome during the process of the mourning and the burial of the Pope. He had, and I wrote about it, I said, if he is against this prophecy being true, and the official Vatican view is a lot of these prophecies are not considered true, but then they do things that show that they are at least testing them. The day that was set for Pope John Paul II to be buried in a crypt underneath the altar, the Bernini altar, a fantastic piece of work. Um, they had this date scheduled, and it happened to have an angular eclipse that was going to happen on that day. And so I wrote, I said, I challenge, I think I was on Coast to Coast talking about it too, and I might have said it with the Russians. I challenge if Cardinal Ratzinger believes that this prophecy is not true, then all he needs to do is delay the burial onto Sunday. I think it was on a Saturday, and just avoid that eclipse. Because what the labor of the sun was thinking, well, he born on an eclipse, he dies on an eclipse. From a total eclipse to an annular eclipse, which is the ring, very powerful omen. He didn't change it. He knew, he knew that it was coming. It's, you know, so it's like nuclear weapons aren't in Israel. It's one of the biggest open secrets in the Catholic Church is that a lot of the top people are very much involved with the Catholic prophecies, even the ones that are heretical. And so he let it happen. The annular eclipse happened. And so that was fulfilled. And then he became Gloria Olivae, which is the glory of the olive. Now, this gets into an interesting play. A lot of Benedictine monastic people from 500 BC to the time of now have said that the apostasy would happen at the crisis in faith, which is a much stronger emphasis in the apocalyptic views of the Catholic Church than it is in the Protestant Church. It's really more, it's the Catholic Church actually relies more on the little apocalypse of Jesus actually himself speaking prophecy on the Mount of Olives after he had taken one look at the great temple of Herod and said, I could take this temple down in 3 days, raise it up again. He was being metaphorical. They thought, but his disciples then when they sat down on the Mount of Olives looking over the temple, they asked him about it, and it's called the Little Apocalypse of Jesus Christ, and it very much talks about this being a crisis in faith at the top. So, so the thing that may very well happen is that so they thought it would be a Benedict, and they presumed that it would be a Benedictine, but actually it's Benedict the 16th, who was a Celestine, by the way, just like Saint Malachi. He was a Celestine, not a Benedictine. Um, Now it's interesting that the Celestine prophet Malachi's mottos were found sandwiched in a larger book called Lignum Vitae, the line of the lineage of the Benedictines, and by Dom Wyon in the mid 1590s. So a Benedictine actually had these Celestine prophecies in it. A Celestine named himself Benedict because he really liked Saint Benedict, the real founder of monastic things, and when Rome was disappearing. And so then so so then Gloria Olivae means glory of the olive, the Mount of Olive, the little apocalypse, describing a future apostasy of the church, which the Catholic faith has embraced as the interpretation of the end times. And so there is a Benedictine sect that wears, they're called the White Benedictines. They wear white robes rather than dark brown. And their whole mission is to through prayer and good deeds, bring forth the fulfillment of that prophecy of the Mount of Olives. They're called the Olivetans. They are Benedictines, but an offshoot of the main Benedictine order. So they're wearing white like Benedict would have. They're not quite the same. So that was all revealed in this. And now, what makes that so amazing to me is that a test that I did in prophecy, when you see there is nothing that's 100% accurate, nothing. It goes against the natural way things change, the way the future is always in motion. And it's because if we live generally kind of rock-like lives, predictable lives, if we're conditioned to do that, we make it more possible for things to be repeated. And, prophecy basically is a misunderstanding of the future, in my view, in my experience. We are repeating the past and calling it a future, but what we're really doing is projecting our past onto the screen of the future. The only way I contend that you really embrace the future is when it is immediately, foreverly coming into this now, coming into this now. That is the naked, unprojected future. Otherwise, all prophecy is an illusion of the past being repeated. And what we're calling the future that we're fulfilling isn't actually the real future. The future is always born in now. So, with that said, the um, the, the I looked at all the first 76 mottos before Weon's version of it was discovered in 1590s. And all the 5 ways you can find for all 76 of those popes, you can find of the 5 steps an answer. And that my first reaction is, what's going on here? Is this a fraud? Is this in the name of Saint Malachi? Is this somebody else using? And there's a tradition. It's in many religions. Vatsina could not have lived all those years to have written all those things. So Vatsina is not, in some of the Hindu epics, is more than one person. Biblical scholars can recognize 3 very different ways, scriptures, in the way they're written in Isaiah, to the point that a lot of them say Isaiah 1, the second Isaiah, the third Isaiah. There are 23 different ways that Daniel's prophecies are written. 2 people probably wrote the book of Zechariah, and so on and so forth. There are many Johns that we don't know which is Saint John or another John. I mean, John of Patmos, who wrote the book of Revelation, may not be Saint John. He may just be another John. Um, well, I mean, the joke is, if you have a Mary Magdalene, Paul, you knew where I was going. You have a Mary Magdalene, who had a lot of Johns before she saw the light. There are indeed a lot of Johns in the early Christian faith. Anyway, the so here's the question too. The questioner also asked a very important question, and that's something I've already written about in an ebook called um, well, if you look at my books, I think it's a little booklet where I started playing with some of the updates that I was planning about 10 years ago for the new update when this Pope would go. And here's the thing, you have 111 mottos, but then there's a break. Then the flow of mottos on 111, which is Benedict the 16th, which is suffering a crisis in the church, which was actually spelled out as the pedophile crisis. And, though they might have beatified and made St. John Paul out of John Paul, the Pope King, king of the church, the bishop, it was Ratzinger that did all the dirty work. And John Paul was part of it. I don't blame it all on Ratzinger. They suppressed thousands of these pedophiles monks. They would then get them out of parishes when they were molesting children. And then what they would do is they would just, I mean, the idea is as old as the church. It's a 16 centuries of church policy that the best thing you can do if you feel powerless to fix it, like the fact that celibacy actually doesn't work, and it's an unnatural way of suppressing people's sexuality, and rather than make them transcend sex, it makes them more obsessed with it. um, this is a problem in Hindus as well as anybody does a celibate thing, because the politics is, if I can be celibate, I am somehow more divine than you, who are a sinner making babies and committing the original sin. So the the apostasy starts with Benedict, and the thread, the lineage is broken. There's not another set of mottos after that. And what happened, which is really shocking. So what I said is, okay, this is a 1 in a million chance in prophecy. We have 76 that are too good to be true. They may be true, but and then when it was published in the 1590s, there were 36 more before it ended. And so I started carefully studying the 36. I mean, I went through all the other ones too and told the stories and how it worked. But, whenever somebody does, I mean, I had a colleague who was writing stuff, and I worked with him. He was one of my first publishers, and he wrote a book clearly not knowing what he was doing about Nostradamus, but he did a very clever thing. He made sure that the prophecies, he said he had broken the code of Nostradamus. And but he did not start the book with the get-go showing, well, if these are true, then of course, as soon as you see this new book, it's all going to be accurate if I've broken the code. What he did instead is he made sure there were 18 months before his list of prophecies started, which means he'd have at least 18 months to make a profit out of this book, which was absolutely failed to make any prophecy work. So with people such as that, you wonder, well, is this person one of those? Is he publishing this and getting out of Rome in the 1590s, and then it'll all fall on its face? Well, it didn't. What it did was the first five or so were pretty inaccurate, but they were the contemporaries, things. As this 35 lists of possible popes went farther and farther into the future, up to our times, from 1590s to now, they became more and more accurate. And it's arguable that these are 90% accurate. And the more they get away from the 1590s, the more they are hitting all the marks. It's quite remarkable. So this is like a rare thing in prophecy to find this. Somebody wrote in the name of Saint Malachi, who was a real prophet. Um, and it fulfilling the, like first Isaiah was kept going by second Isaiah, kept going by third Isaiah, and so forth. So it wasn't like a joke, a flim flam. It was just somebody who wanted to hide under a very respected prophet. He had made other prophets, Malachi, prophecies. He used his name in that ancient tradition so that he could hide himself behind the great prophet, and he hid an even greater prophet. That's a theory that I have. So finally, now the other part of this is that, okay, why then is there a coda at the end? Why is the last pope, the 112th pope, called Petrus Romanus, Peter of Rome? Now, first off, most people, it's an honest projection. You think, oh, well, he must be calling himself Peter. No, you can't call yourself Peter, because the first pope, the first bishop of Rome, was Saint Peter. So it's a rule that no one can use the name Peter. Okay, the second possibility is whoever is that person Even if he calls himself Francis, his birth name is Pietro. So that's one of the that's number this no Peter, but the one of the five things that comes up a lot is people's names, their Christian names. Um, it so happens that Saint Francis had Pietro Benedone, I think, was his father was a Francophile. He was a merchant. He married a French woman. He was very much into the French culture and all that back then in the medieval times. And Saint Francis of Assisi is the person modeled that the cardinal from Argentine cardinal. I can't remember his Christian name, but he didn't even put a number. He didn't say Francis the First. It's just simply Francis because he loved Francis of Assisi, and I must say I really love Francis of Assisi too. Um, Interestingly enough, the person that I write so much about, Nostradamus, loved Franciscan monks, and he was originally buried in a wall in a small Franciscan church outside of Salon-Provence that later had to be moved to a larger church after the French Revolution had raided his grave and a bunch of National Guardsmen were getting drunk, tossing his bones around. That's another story. I'll tell it another time. Um, so, so I have a few theories about this. Um, it's it's possible that the time sequence has been disrupted. If I mean, there are a lot of things that happen with St. Francis, which makes him the last pope. You could argue it. His name, he had Peter, he also, anyway, I'll save those for you guys all to read it all later. But what I can say now is one theory could be that in the apostasy, the last pope is not coming for a while, but a lot of false popes coming after Benedict will be coming, anti-popes, false popes. Um, and because the tradition is broken, and in a way, is that not what Benedict did? When he did not die in his papal bed, but actually retired as Pope Emeritus and create a new tradition, and then Francis may do the same thing if he lives. That means this lineage is broken. That means the last pope, which has a paragraph, may not be the next to succeed. It could be many popes down the line, and then it just jumps. And if you read medieval scriptures and stuff, there's a lot of this where it's like going properly like a modern thing, and then something just goes way over and does something else. So it's possible that Petrus Romanus is not Peter of Rome, who uses a name that has Pietro in it, who later became Francis. It could very well be that there will be a crisis in the church, as been foreseen by many Catholic prophecies, and there will be disputes about one or two more popes maybe from now, and that Francis, because the paragraph is quite grim. It talks about the Church of Rome, the Church of the Seven, the city of the Seven Hills will be utterly destroyed, and the great Lord will judge the people. And it's Petrus Romanus is, and then the final pope there will be Petrus Romanus, and he will be feeding the flock. Now, being feeding the flock, as in the holy, this is my blood, this is my body. But also, I think it might very well mean feeding the flock literally, like because of famines and things disrupting, maybe from extension of a few more decades into global warming. The challenge will really be great, and it's very possible that this whole upheaval is could also be because of Campo Filigre, is a supervolcano, which wind directions are in line of the 3 days of darkness, days and nights of darkness over Rome from a huge explosion could happen there. It's active right now, and it's getting more active near Napoli, where it is, or Vesuvius could erupt. The eruption of Vesuvius that was far greater than what destroyed the Roman city was back in the Neolithic times. There was a huge eruption because Vesuvius also has the power like to erupt like a supervolcano, and it would have also made ash go all across Rome and all that. So um, maybe there's some possibilities, either a natural disaster, a volcanic eruption, a nuclear war, or climate disruption, or something like that, brings us to the very besieged Peter of Rome, who is literally trying to feed the flock because Catholics are starving as much as feed the soul. And he will be there for the awful judge who will judge the people. So it's not a very nice ending to all of this, but kind of typical of how a lot of Judgment Day things are written. But I then follow that with the whole looking at the age of the Holy Spirit and how the future, I think, is going to happen. It's already starting to happen. We'll maybe see the end of those ideas, and the church will die because the divine will be directly accessed to us in the next 20 centuries. So let's see, my answer to a complicated question. Complicated answer for a complicated question.
I want to dovetail into what you were saying. Amber types in that I don't know the New Testament at all. So Amber says that Jesus ended up changing Peter's name to the Rock.
No.
So maybe, is it possible? Is it possible that if that is true, that Peter of Rome is really a hint of the Rock of Rome? And does that mean anything?
Well, Amber's wrong. Pietro, in Romance languages means rock. So, you know, uh,
Oh,
his name was Rock. And Jesus was only saying, upon this rock, I will build my church. It seemed like Jesus was a bit of a punster. you know, Pierre means stone, rock. So,
yeah. Yeah.
but good try. I mean, and then it doesn't actually deny what Amber's saying. I mean, it's like the metaphor is as important in prophecy as the literal. So, the rock on which the church is placed, the seven hills of Rome, upon this volcanic rock, I shall build my church of Rome. That's all possible. Things to at least be considered. But the yeah, that's a good, interesting question. Good try.
So Darren, our last show on episode 28, he was asking a question about did we read a certain book from the 1800s or whatever? Remember that?
Oh, that was Baron Trump. His question, I almost said Baron, but he had given only half of the title. And I wrote him about it afterwards. I think.
So he types in a question. So let's try to answer this. So John
Yeah.
and Paul, your thoughts on the novels of the travels and adventures of Little Baron Trump?
Yeah.
So do you think that people are really travel like Baron Trump, or even Donald Trump is traveling from a different time period?
Oh, it's online because it's in public domain. So I found the book and I read it, and it has some nice illustrations in it. It's actually a lot of the book is just an adventure tale, with illustrations, and the Baron is having all these different experiences. And um, I I think people project that idea that he's traveling from another time. And when I read it, I really didn't see any connections to a time machine or anything like that. However, I do what resonates with me, and even more so now with the test of time, is that Barron could be a future president in the 2040s. And that the other thing that's been kind of ruffling my oracular skirts is or monk's robe is I started to feel like I saw the Spielberg's Lincoln, and when I first saw it, I kind of I thought that Daniel Day-Lewis, who I love as an actor, didn't quite capture Lincoln, but I wasn't against it because it's when something becomes so monumental, it's but I think I was wrong because I stumbled upon scenes of the movie again, and then I'm just watching a lot of the different scenes, and I think it's just like what happened with me with Pulp Fiction. First time I saw it, I hated it. And then I saw it again and I fell in love with it. I totally love that movie. So I'm kind of setting some time aside to give Lincoln a second try. Um, and this whole thing with Trump led to I was having a reading with another person who is also powerful seer of future things, definitely interesting. I won't name names, but and she wanted to actually put some things past me and see what oracularly responded out of me. And she said, "Well, I think Barron is the reincarnation of Abraham Lincoln."
What?
I mean, yeah,
And
well,
I've never had that feeling ever,
I
ever.
have.
But now going back to that, he is extremely tall.
Yeah. And so what I did is I got, since fortunately Lincoln had a lot of daguerreotype film pictures of him, I went as far back as I could find to the youngest shot of Lincoln, and the face, there's some likeness.
Well,
There's
it's
some
early,
he looked like I mean he's
in-
thank God his mother is so aesthetically beautiful and all, and because he's got and actually spending his early years learning Slovene shaped his muscles. I mean, I can do this sometimes. I can look at a face and I can tell if they're a Russian or an Australian or something because if you do your vowels and consonants a certain way, it changes the musculature of your face. Like almost all the Australians have kind of an overbite. Hi, mate. What are you doing? But and
it's
then the Russians are all they are all protecting their vowels because it's too cold to let them out in Russian winter. So it changes the way faces look. And I I had a shock in the other way. I said, "My God, I think you're onto something." And it's just been so weird how all this Lincoln stuff is coming.
well, during the inauguration, in the background was the two statues. It was Lincoln and Grant.
Yeah. Yes. But and it'll be interesting to see how he ages. But when I saw the youngest beardless Lincoln photos that are around, I mean, in the general construction of his skull and the design of his head, wow, the similarities. It's more aesthetic, Thank God his mom was a beauty, and his and so, but it doesn't always happen that people come back looking like they did before. But sometimes there's a quality, and I've seen this from my own studies of past lives that I've lived. Sometimes you look very much like you did before. I certainly, in my French cavalryman's life, when I died in 1812, I look exactly like I do now, same body type even, only with different hair and no mutton chop sideburns, a waxed mustache, and a Montesquieu thing on the chin, with ringlets, and kind of a dark and swarthy South Frenchman. Um, and I've even sometimes compared some artwork of this guy, sketch work, in some of my articles. And there's also the very interesting way in which Donald Trump very much seems to be a reincarnation of George S. Patton. And it fits, even though he was born 6 months after. But there's a situation in reincarnation where you don't really become a part of, or where in your body until you've formed a little more. And so the soul doesn't immediately go in at 9 months before birth. It can be 3 months later after birth, even 6 months later after birth. So there's a window where the soul that died in the auto accident in 1945 is born in 1946 as Donald J. Trump. What really made me wonder about that was watching how he handled being shot, going down on the ground, and then rising up just like a George S. Patton would have done. It was just, you never know about that stuff and I think that shot actually awakened something in Mr. Trump. He's a changed man since that happened. Um, I think that was the shot that won him the election. The other thing that did it was when he brought in J.D. Vance, but especially when he brought in Democrats that have been shunned from the party, who were some of their most talented leaders, could be presidents, Democratic presidents, if they were allowed. Bobby Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard. And the fact that Trump won all of his main cabinet people, wow, that was a miracle because I didn't know. Kash Patel made it. That was the hardest one. He did lose one person who was going to be the attorney general, but he was replaced by Bondi. I think that's going to be Pam Bondi is going to be very interesting. So this is very important with Trump because Trump is a channeler of people, but but he'll channel anybody. He's a bit unconscious about it because in a way, he's that millipede. No, I can't think about how I walk. That's how I walk. So it has its good sides. It's spontaneous. It's not burdened with a mind in a way, but it has its downsides is that you might be channeling John Bolton or Mike Pompeo or somebody that would have not been as good as Bobby Kennedy or Kash Patel for FBI and HHS, somebody lesser than those rare men and rare woman like Tulsi Gabbard, who's going to be the gatekeeper to the information and intelligence departments that presidents have not been getting right. That is literally going to be the choice between life and death of the future of the human race. Now, and you can tell because of his responses to the Russian situation, starting dialogues and all. I know as an intimate study of Russian situations that I can immediately tell that he has now got people around him who are spelling out how the Russians really think, how they feel about these. And Rubio is showing he's the biggest surprise. He's really getting into being Secretary of State, and he's quite good because he's getting real intel. Keith Kellogg was cut from the old guard. I mean, he was talking stuff that only people who haven't really studied Russia since the end of the last Cold War would still think exists. But those of us who actually look at Russia and see it for as it is now, not with projections, it's an utter shock to see how dangerous it's been that bipartisan understanding of Russia in America in our government is dangerous because it's all wrong. You can't make the right decisions if you are literally just following mere projections about people who potentially could you go to war with, or nuclear war. Well, that's changing, and that is really for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis, when it ended on my seventh birthday, and it changed my life, made me kind of why I do what I do. I this is the first time that I'm seeing that with all the trials and tribulations that could still be before us, I'm really seeing an end through thermonuclear war really being put on the shelf in a way that in my entire life, and I'm entered my 70th year, I've never seen. So now, now we are in a revolution. The Second American Revolution has started with and um, and who would have thought that it would be catalyzed by Donald J. Trump, Celebrity Apprentice. But there, we're not living in 1776. We're living in 2025, and it's a different country.
Do you feel as though Trump would support Taiwan, or do you think that he would change the mindset of our relationship with Taiwan and almost give appeasement to China with the
I
one China
I
policy?
I think the whole Taiwan thing has disappeared. It's no longer on the table. I mean, they're giving lip service to it, but I don't think there's going to be that war over that. In the trajectory of Biden, yes. And Kamala Harris, absolutely. Because they were not leaders, they were being led by the military industrial complex. Military industrial complex is about to get its audit,
Mhm.
and it's going to be big. And USAID has been responsible for so much evil. It is the spear point of American arrogance and hegemonic established in the name of revolution and goodwill. It's been a source of evil. It's been a front for the CIA to do all kinds of subversion of other countries, which we have no business meddling with, like Georgia just recently. That was all USAID. The the reason why we almost went to World War III with Russia started in 2014 when Obama and Victoria Nuland as the Deputy Secretary of State, using USAID funding, dumped $6 billion into basically creating the Maidan coup that threw out the democratically elected Russian Ukrainian from Donbass, Viktor Yanukovych, who was a popular president. He was a president before he became president again. And what happened was they threw him out and they replaced Newland, and USAID replaced him with the who's who of Bandera-right fascists that got their start as fast and faithful allies of Hitler. They manned most of the death camps, were Ukrainians from the Bandera fascists. The Galicia division, SS division, was a Ukrainian fascist division that did all kinds of mayhem and war crimes. And this thread survived and took power again, the first fascist regime to take power since Hitler and in Europe. And it always leads to a world war. And it cannot be negotiated with, it can only be eradicated, like Hitler. And so um, the good news is, in this regard, is that the Americans and the Russians are now talking, and now they're really hearing each other. And Ukraine is a little irritant in this. They're seeing the bigger picture, something Putin has been trying to do since just before the war started, when he sent this idea of a new architecture of mutual security in the world. And I published it for my readers at the end of 2021. I said, whatever happens in this war coming, it will always come back to this. this is the end game. It'll be updated for the new realities of that time, but it will come back to what was originally drafted on 17th of December 2021, handed to NATO, handed to the United States, is an idea of creating, because as Putin said, and this is so true, so if your security is given by making your opposite insecure, then it's not security for anybody. If you feel more secure to have Ukraine to put your nuclear missiles just 4 minutes from obliterating Moscow, you may feel safer. You shouldn't, because there's a dead hand switch in the Russian nuclear program that if Moscow is decapitated, all its 6,000 missiles are after you in 10 minutes. So it's just a non-starter. But these idiots don't seem to understand that because they don't talk to the Russians. And the Russians have always been consistent and clear of their intentions. And finally, we have an American president and cabinet who are listening. And it's one of the most, whatever Trump's faults are, this is literally saving the world from blowing itself up and all of your lives being halted in an unnatural, violent ways. And so they're already thinking in terms of those terms from 17th December. How can we redesign this thing? Because another thing Trump did with just one thought, he ended the hegemonic era of 34 years. He didn't end it by saying it's over. He just ignored its existence and started talking about Fortress America, talking about a more William McKinley way of looking at the world. And America is just one of two great powers. And if the three powers find a way to define their interests, um, that can lead to a more stable world, a world that does not need a military industrial complex trying to find new wars and chaos. So it's changed the gestalt. I mean, when Vance came and made that speech to the Munich Security Council, he so deeply shocked the European leadership. He basically said, well, and Hegseth saying it in the Ramstein meeting with NATO, is that, well, you've all been relying on us. Now it's time for you to rely on yourselves more and build your, and if you wanting to go to war with Russia, don't think that we're going to be there and back you up, because it's a new world now. We're not playing the hegemon anymore. And so what that means in so many ways is that means NATO doesn't have a reason for being. That means the European Union, which is a vassal outstretch of us, astrologically, the European Union was born with with a Scorpio ascendant, 8 degrees. It so happens that the United States, it's Scorpio sun, sorry, it's the sun sign, the identity of the EU was born with a Scorpio sun at 8 degrees. It is squared the ascendant of the United States birth chart in Scorpio at 8 degrees. So we're joined to the hip, and they are our satellites. They're our Warsaw Pact in Europe. Well, there's no need for a Warsaw Pact if you have peace with Russia. There's no need. And so all that vanishes because they're irrelevant now. It's just like, it's just, and that things like that are going to happen in the next few decades, where things we just always assume that will always forever be there will just one moment not be there anymore. It's like the reason for NATO has been taken away. And these poor people who are holding on, I mean, what you've had is generations of European leadership who have relied on big United States since the end of World War II and the beginning of the First Cold War in 1948 with the Berlin crisis, airlift crisis. From that point on, Europeans have lost their ability to stand with their own spine and be their own sovereign leadership. They've literally gone soft, depending on us. And now we're done with it. We have better things to do with our money than to throw it all into military industrial complexes, trying to create chaos and war to keep the business going. We're all tired of that. Even Americans are tired of forever wars. So, military industrial complex, in these 3 years of this war in Ukraine, all those multi-trillion dollar weapons, we see what they do in a big war. They're they suck. They're trillions of dollars. They don't work. They break down. They're built to be breaking down so that they constantly make more money for the military industrial complex. Oh, we can't keep making parts for the F-35 because only 1/4 of the existing F-35s are functioning. The rest are in the shop. The Russian weapons don't do that. The Russians are 10, 20 years ahead of us in hypersonic and kinetic weapons and things like that. They're doing hypersonic. Um, the industries, Russian industries are not profit driven. They are purpose driven because they are not privatized like ours are. Our military industry should not be privatized because then these sick people want to make money out of death and war rather than make something that's simple, strong, versatile, doesn't American builders of things, they want your F-35 to wipe your butt and make you coffee and do all kinds of things, which means it's too complicated, it's breaking down all the time. The Russian S-52 6 and all these, this is its purpose. These are its basic purposes, and it does it consistently. And if you want something else, build another thing that can do that. Not make an all-purpose jet fighter, bomber, girlfriend, God knows, um, and make it one thing fits all. Well, it doesn't. It's just a dumb idea, and another one just fell out of the sky just recently. I mean,
Mhm.
um,
I think it was in Alaska, wasn't it?
well, I don't know. I think it looked like it was sunnier than that, but the guy got out, but it was just kind of like falling flat down and it hit a airfield. But I mean, I've seen many crashes of this thing. The F-35 sucks, and it's cost trillions of dollars. And so, what we need is what the Russians do. We only need, that the volunteers are coming back again since Trump is in. I mean, a lot of people said, I don't want somebody I come here to defend this nation and be a soldier, not get educated in the art of drag queens, you know, and not have cross-dressing generals and all of that. Come on. This is a warrior culture. At least have Valkyries and Amazons like Tulsi Gabbard, But this is, and a lot of people, there was 1,500 of our best special forces people because they didn't take the jab. They were dismissed. Now Trump's trying to get them back. But we lost a third of our special forces that way. I
Right,
mean,
right.
this is stupid stuff and dangerous. So what happens now is now that it's Fortress America, now that if you're just here to defend the nation you love, rather than go fight some corporate war for corporate wealthy people in the name of your country in Iraq or some other distant, godforsaken place, it's no wonder that our people, our men and women are coming home with PTSD and stuff because they're living a lie. They're not defending us. They're fighting for the oil and wealthy people of empire. And now America is going to come back to being the defender of the nation. A lot of the people are going to the south border, are going to be military now. The 10th Mountain Division is there patrolling there. So they're defending the territory like any basic country does. And so it's such a release of the burden of hegemonic. If you're Atlas and you're moving everybody else's spheres of influence, not your own, it's also included, you got too much spinning around. And I have a line in this new bunch of articles and says, I kind of say, hey, Ian, hey, Ayn Rand, Atlas is shrugging. He's shrugging off all of the policemen of the world. He's shrugging off all this stuff. He's going to come back to just being an American country again. And the whole world's going to benefit from that. And frankly, the whole world will fall in love with America again. But when we started to weaponize the US dollar, all of this, we just became a really nasty little brat as a young nation in the last 34 years. We were just a big, strong, stupid brat. And now, fortunately, we might grow out of that without thermonuclear war and be something really wonder. I've always felt that America's greatest future is ahead of us, but it has to drop being this bully, this hypocrite. And it's oddly enough, of all people, Donald Trump is the gateway to that. And I'm trying, it's quite a challenge to try to find a way to convey that strange tale. I tried a little bit today, to share some of the stuff that kind of goes beyond thinking and reasoning, but there's like another level, and a little more Zen. And I'm still working on it. It's
Well, I mean,
work in
we're in some interesting times. We're never going to see a time like this in the rest of our life. These next 4 years are going to be pretty intense.
Well, and it's the next 4 years that could very well start the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I've always been against term limits, except for the one where the American people, a majority, just decide after 2 or 3 or 4 terms, okay, that's it. I let the people decide, not just some random number. Because I'll tell you something, if there had been term limits in the 1930s, we would have lost World War II. We won World War II with the other allies because we had a generational president. We had a president that went for 4 terms. I mean, Roosevelt didn't want to do a third term, but he saw World War II coming, and he didn't see anybody in American isolationists that, knowing full well, rightfully, that we would end up being pulled into it. He didn't see anybody but himself that could prepare the country, and he had to keep quiet about it. It literally took Pearl Harbor, another curse that turns into a blessing, unexpected blessing. I mean, the day before Pearl Harbor, he was getting all this pressure from the isolationists, and I understand where the isolationists are coming from. Why do they have to pull us into their European wars? Why? We lost a lot of people in World War I in a few months that we were in it, and so I think I would have been an isolationist in those days. But then Pearl Harbor was hit. And the very same people that were really getting on his case for hinting that he might be getting us into wars, they were calling him up the next day and they were saying, "What can we do to help you, Mr. President?" It's just like that. Isolationists, they saw the reality and they responded. But if Roosevelt wasn't there in 1940, and then because he was elected in 1940 for a third term, they might have had somebody on the other side of the phone who wouldn't get involved, and we wouldn't have gotten involved. And there wouldn't have been any reason for Japan to deal with us because Roosevelt um, wouldn't be there. They might just go conquer China. And then Hitler would not have had American industry gearing up the Russians as well as the French and the British, and he could have won the war. And he might have had the nuclear bomb too before we did. So I like going into these what ifs because they're fictional, but they do impact when you're trying to make decisions in the present. The what ifs that could happen are very important to consider because again, it's not the future. We're repeating the past and calling it the future. So we have a record of it. It might be in a variation of a theme, but you know. So term limits I'm against, and another proof of it is that Vladimir Putin has been in power since 1999, elected by the people of Russia because. But if you understood Russian politics, if he was not working, they would have voted him out. Their democracy is actually in better shape than ours, despite what people are talking about it who don't know what they're talking about in this country. But the Russians had, without having Putin, and then for a few terms Medvedev, and then Putin back, some changes like Russia's being resurrected from its complete destruction and the time of troubles in the 1990s, that takes generations. And I see it developing that a string of Trumps, a string um, Vances, a Vance could be two-term. He might be followed by um, um, Don Jr., who knows, or Bobby Kennedy may actually run, and he's part of this movement now, and then Barron Trump in the 2040s. You could see something with several leaders that could, you need time to stamp out the deep state. Some things require a generational conditioning change. That's why I'm so against term limits, because sometimes a problem requires a man be there or a woman be running the show for 30 years. Because it takes 30. Some things take 30 years and the same leadership. Some things don't. So I'm totally against term limits for that reason.
Right. Well, we've reached
The
the witch,
magic,
the magic hour here.
it's
I
Paul's
want
Betty Bye time.
I,
It's the nighttime.
I want to remind the audience that in the description of this video and all the videos that I do with John, you can click the link and it'll take you to his website. Please sign up for his periodical, do a reading. Um, and we're doing a live stream right now on YouTube, Rumble, and the simulcast on Spaces. But before we sign off, I just want to thank everybody for, you know, participating in the chat. The ones that did sign on Spaces, and we're going to be doing this again in another 2 weeks or so. So just, put that on your calendar, and don't be shy to ask questions. This is supposed to be an interactive show, so the more that you interface with John, the better. But before we go, John, if you want to just quickly, talk about your periodical and your readings.
Well, you could always free sample my some articles and parts of articles from my Hogue prophecy report, which I do about 2, 3 articles at the beginning and end of each month. Um, and that is fully illustrated. I download it through email so that it when you sometimes go a little lower tech, you actually get underneath all the people who don't respect our free speech, which are being besieged, fortunately, these days, for now. So yes, it's just $60. You'll have the links where you can go through my website to my PayPal page, and you can do an automatic payment for $5 or more that automatically is paid every month, and or you can do for a whole year for $60. And and then I send the email that you use, I send that you purchased with, unless you give me another email that you want me to send it to, I will then attach it, the PDF file, fully illustrated, to it and send it to you. Um, the other thing is that if you go to hogueprophecy.com, uh, which you will see, and that's Hogue prophecy. So it's like Hogue, like the wine, Hogue, as one word connected to prophecy, PROPHECY.com. And so you type that in, and you will see the samples. You can get them. You can buy the full each thing alone too, if you want. That's also possible. So there's three options. I have the options there. And the other thing too is you go on HogueProphecy.com, you'll see right at the top, you will see my link to an email where you contact me to set up a reading. And what'll happen is if you, all you need to do is put reading on it, and or Hogue reading, but reading. And if you do that, I will see it immediately, even despite all the hundreds of emails I get, and then I will contact you and then give you instructions on what we do and the thing. It's a Zoom reading, and we also do a little astrology, which you can get free from astro.com and give me a chart, which is really good to read. And so I do the astrology. I also do the Osho Zen Tarot deck to go deeper. And I kind of have an unusual way I do it sometimes. If in the deck it's looking in the Celtic cross that I have to go deeper, I pull that card out and do another Celtic cross on it. And it's interesting because sometimes it's like two or three Celtic cross, and then suddenly it's like the cards get really magical and it's going somewhere, and you'll see it. So those readings can last they can last up to 2 hours too. So we go deep, and they're a lot of fun, and it's like like I give all the energy to all of you, I give all this energy to one of you before me with the same background, my office. And so, yeah, that's basically it.
All right. So for the audience, I also pasted the link in the chat in Rumble and in YouTube, but all my shows that I've done with John, in the description of each video, the links are there. So you just click the link, it'll take you to his website. John, thank you again for part 29. And so we're gonna sign off here. But John, because I have to click so many different buttons because I have three things going on now. Um, so just
You're a
stay
conductor.
there. Yeah, just stay there. But just
Yeah.
say goodbye to everybody before we sign off here.
Goodbye, everybody, and bless you all. Thank you for taking your time to share yourself with us. Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening, guys and gals. And we're gonna be signing off here.